Welcome to another presentation of the Relationship Toolbox, a show about the skills needed to build positive relationships with others. Today our topic is going to be about having difficult conversations with teenagers. What issues are most challenging for teenagers to work through with peers, or with parents, or perhaps with teachers? And what communication skills might be most useful to help them in these situations? We are honored today to have two teenagers with us to help us tackle this topic. We have Leah, who is 16 years of age, and Austin, who is also 16 years of age. So thank you for coming and sharing your views on this. We really look forward to that.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I want to make something very clear to our audience, in that we have asked Leah and Austin to share their point of view about different topics and conversations that might be difficult to have with especially people in authority. However, I want to make it clear that the situations that they will be giving us are not necessarily their own or personal ones that they've had, although they may use that if they wish, but more of a composite of things that they are aware of, that their peers have told them about, are difficult for them to deal with. So, Traci, why don't we start with something here?
Okay, so we want to start the show by asking Leah and Austin a couple of questions. And you can take your time answering, and just whatever comes to mind is what we're looking for. We're looking for you to give us some kind of example of a difficult conversation that you might have, that you might be confronted with in your daily life. We're also going to ask you who the conversation would be with and what type of issue it might be between the two people. So can you think of an example of something that might be difficult for you to have a conversation about with someone?
I'll go first.
Sure. I know that as a teenager, a lot of us play sports, so I know that it can be hard to confront your coach about something, especially it's about like a very iffy subject these days, which is usually playtime, since sports can get really competitive at high schools nowadays.
Right. People are trying to get that playtime. Yep. Great, thank you. So that might be a conversation between yourselves and a coach. Okay. And then the issue would maybe be just how much playtime. Any other issues that you can think of that might come up?
Or maybe if you didn't like the way a coach handled something, or even if you just wanted to talk to them about if you were late for a practice, or if you need to skip a game or something like that.
Okay, great. Austin, how about you? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, if you're one of those kids in the classroom that's been kind of pinned in the past as the troublemaker, it can be kind of difficult to plead a case if a teacher accuses you of something for talking out in class and you really didn't do it this time. And it can be very hard to kind of get that teacher to really see that you didn't do it this time.
Right.
And it's just, yeah, it can be very difficult.
Okay, so being kind of pinpointed as a person who typically does that, but this go-round, that's not what happened, and you want to be able to address them.
Correct,
about that. Yeah, that's a tough one. Okay. Any other situations that come up? So you
We have about 3 of them here. Is there another one that we might be able to?
A big one is when your parents try to have a set of rules or something similar to that, and you, whether it's curfew or something along those lines, and you want to kind of compromise with your parent about something and try to get it in a way that also benefits you and your parent in that same way, and having that conversation can be hard sometimes.
Okay, good point.
So kind of addressing something with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I think we pinned the most common ones.
Great.
Yeah.
If something comes up, you can always add on to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've identified a couple of situations, and now we want to kind of pull it apart and identify what's going on there. So let's take the one with the coach first, if that's okay.
Yeah,
so what is actually being said if you're talking about playtime or way something was handled, and what makes this so hard?
Well, typically when you're talking about playtime, it's usually if you don't get enough. And the problem is you're putting in so much time during the week, you're practicing, taking time out of homework and other things that you could be doing, and you're dedicating it to this sport. So, of course, that always plays off when it comes to the game. And then when you've worked so hard and you don't get enough time to show that, that can usually be hard and hurtful in some ways. And so of course your coach decides when you go in, when you come out. So it's hard when your coach, he's the one that runs everything. Like, he is the one that you look up to. He is your role model. He plans your practices, you know, tells you when to do this, when to do that, what you're doing in the game, plays, things like that. So I think that that conversation can be hard because sometimes it can be seen as a challenge in certain ways, when really it is just a concern of more like, why am I not going in versus you should be putting me in. It's more of, it should be more of a question rather than a kind of demand in that way.
I think the idea of something being perceived as a challenge to that implied authority is hard, because you don't want to necessarily make that challenge, and the authority figure doesn't want to be challenged. So if you can get beyond that positional place, it's good. So I picked up on sometimes it's more about why than if, and so sometimes if you can just reframe the question, like, help me understand how come I didn't get to play, or help me understand whatever, instead of coming at somebody directly.
Because that can just like basically set the whole conversation when you walk into the office and you're, why did I get put in the fourth quarter, versus saying, or I should have been in the fourth quarter, versus saying like, coach, like, why after all this practice I've had, like, what was your choosing for me not to be in longer than I was? And even if you don't like the response, maybe it was, no matter what it is, it should be like an okay kind of thing, rather than like, well, and like arguing, more like being like, okay, I can see that, because it is in the past. It's not like.
But to ask about what was your strategy, so you're remaining curious rather than accusing.
Right.
And so what would make, no matter what the outcome is, what would make it an okay conversation that felt satisfying to you when it was over, regardless of how it turns out?
Probably just having well, if you don't say anything in the first place, that coach isn't going to know that you were upset with the playtime you have. Because if you don't say anything, maybe he or she won't even notice that you didn't get that playtime, being like, oh, yeah, maybe I should have done this instead of that. And so I think no matter what the outcome is, it's like positive to speak up about an issue that you have for that person to see it. So I feel like no matter what, just kind of saying that in a good, respectful way is beneficial.
Being heard.
Yeah.
Does it feel better to yourself too to know, at least I did something about this, I just didn't take it, you know, that I did try to speak up, and I feel better about it. So there's another element within yourself of that. One other method that can help sometimes to try to figure out, how do I approach this person, because obviously each adult is going to be different with his or her own sense of sensitivities, is to try to put yourself into the role of that person before you even begin to talk to them. So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm the coach, and I now have a student coming up to me and saying, you know, in some way, why wasn't I put in, or I want to be put in more time? What might I be thinking as a coach to myself about that? What do you think a coach might be thinking? We don't know for sure, but what might they be thinking? What might they be feeling just by that question being presented?
I mean, I think a coach can first think that, oh, this kid is taking it personal. He's taking this personally, that, oh, he must think that I don't like him as a player. And I think that can be kind of hard for a coach, because if a kid is always complaining in practice about not enough playing time, and he's coming to you again, you can kind of feel that it may be personal. And as that player, if you get a sense from the coach that it is personal, it can be hard to keep coming forward saying, I think I deserve a little more practice time.
Okay. So one of the reasons for doing that, putting yourself sort of in their shoes before you even attempt to do anything, is to begin to strategize, if that were true, and that's what I'm dealing with, that sensitivity, how might I counter that in terms of the way I approach it? I think you were talking a little bit, Leah, about how changing it from a question, or the way you worded it could make a difference. So the idea here is to put yourself in the other person's role, and then say, what could I tolerate if I'm real sensitive to this particular thing? How might the question, how might the request be worded so that I would be least likely to be offended or go on the defensive for that? That's a help sometimes in structuring what you're going to do.
And also taking a little bit of time, take a step back, so that if it's just after a game, that might not be the best time to go and approach, you know, from your perspective and the coach's perspective.
Unless you just
both.
won the game.
Right.
Because it can be very emotional.
It's right, it can be a very trying
Yes.
time, and so taking a step back and asking the questions, you know, sitting down and thinking about the questions you really want the answers to, and those are the questions you want to ask. So, and like Tom's saying, put yourself in their shoes to how you're going to perceive those questions if you're asked those questions. So take time to ask, to write down what the questions might be, what you really want to know the answers to.
Or practice them with someone, you know, and you can acknowledge to someone, if you think that's their sensitivity, is I want to be very careful when I'm asking this, not to come across in this way, because I know that would not be right. So you're already acknowledging that that might exist without blaming anybody for it, and saying I'm doing everything in my power not to do that.
Well,
So
I think
you're going to
a step, you can, the empathy piece is an internalized process, but to make it external, you can validate them, you know,
yes.
and make it explicit so that they know that you're empathizing, saying, you know, gosh, it must be so hard in the heat of the moment to have to make all of these decisions. I can't imagine. And I was just wondering, you know, what was your thinking? Or
what could I do differently?
yeah. Or, you know, to transfer to your situation, Austin, was like, it's really got to be hard to have eyes on all 25 of us at a time or whatever.
Or meet all our demands.
And,
Yes.
you know, to juggle everything. And but I just wanted to talk to you about something.
Yeah.
So if you've done that, empathizing in that, kind of getting into their feet, you can show them by starting the conversation. I think it softens it a little bit because you're you know, you may not be praising so much, but you're validating the role that they play and the difficult situation that they may have found themselves in that made it complicated. And that's an uncharged way to start the conversation.
And being respectful of their time.
Respectful?
Also,
Yes.
of
Is
their
this a good
time.
time?
Is this a good time?
Is this
You
a
know,
good
instead
time?
of going in and saying, you know, this is how I feel, this is whatever it is, or asking the questions. Do you have a few minutes? You know, people don't often, we as adults don't do that either, right? I mean, we often walk into someone's office or walk into someone's,
Ba-boom.
yeah, and you just start talking.
Right.
Right.
You don't ask if it's good for them.
Exactly. So just asking that question right up front.
Did you want to say something?
Well,
Yeah.
going off of what Traci said, because I definitely think rather than, I think it's better to more personalize it, but you do have to look at both sides, because if you say, what were you thinking in that moment, you might,
Still a little
Exactly.
well, also, well, not even if it's worded like that, something along those lines, like the coach might think that you're questioning their coaching when you're really questioning the whole playtime aspect, because you want to keep it specific to the problem that's being addressed, rather than saying, you want to rather be like, coach, why didn't I get enough playtime, saying, like, coach, why, rather than questioning their
What
coaching.
can I do for next
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
Or even
right.
letting them know what's important to you, that acknowledging, like we just said, of the coach's role and the dilemma they have to please everybody. But just to let them know, it's really so important to me to get as much play time as I can.
yeah.
And I know you're thinking about all that, but I wanted you to know that it's real important to me, and these are all the things I'm doing to try to be ready for my opportunity.
I'm putting in 14 hours of practice time a week.
Yes.
And,
And it's
but
giving
I
them
know,
information. It's giving them information that it might seemingly be obvious that they should have this information, but maybe they don't. So giving them that information and saying, you know, this is what I'd like, this is what I want to do. Because they might have other students or players who come to them and don't want to play that much. They might not be that interested. So if letting your needs be known
I think
is important.
also, as a teacher or as a parent or as a coach, you know, we do things and we think that we know the territory, but it's good to be reminded, and we can learn as well.
And
To
get a
be
different
reminded of
perspective.
your perspective,
Yeah.
of what it's like to be a teenager, what it's like to be an athlete, what it's like to be, you know, an employee somewhere with young. And you have, it's high risk though, because you don't want to make it worse. And you have a long-term relationship with this coach or with
Yeah.
this teacher. So, you know, maybe you can even acknowledge, I know in the past I may have, you know, done things that were not within the lines of the rules of the classroom, but I would like you to understand that this time it wasn't me.
Right, like I think owning up to previous actions, if you have been pinned as like a troublemaker, I mean, owning up, well, I did, yes, speak out in class last week, but telling you this time it wasn't me. It can really help kind of see the teacher maybe try to take you a little more seriously, that if you have that maturity to own up in the past, you're telling the truth.
Now, what about in a situation like either one of these that you've mentioned, and you've done this, you know, you've tried to imagine what the other person might be thinking, to be sensitive to, you've rephrased everything to be as respectful as you can, and you still get some type of response that seems either biased, judgmental, or defensive. What can you do then?
I think most kids nowadays would probably start to give up, kind of lose hope. I mean, it's like the second go around and this adult still doesn't understand. I mean, you can try to rephrase it even more.
Yes?
But I mean, I think sometimes rephrasing it even more, if you're like, well, why didn't you put me in at this quarter? Like the coach can start to kind of get a little, okay.
Builds the defensiveness.
Again, no. And questioning, like Leah said, the coach's integrity and how a coach coaches. And I think rephrasing it for 3, 4, 5 times, it can be kind of demeaning on yourself because you're still getting nowhere.
How long do I have to keep saying this?
Exactly.
Are both of you familiar with the iMessage format, which some might come into a play here when you're feeling, how many times have I mentioned this and yet it doesn't seem to be taking hold? This allows you the opportunity to say, when I come to you and ask for as much playtime as possible, and this is your response, you keep it descriptive, not judgmental. I feel
Hopeless.
I feel hopeless. Yeah, that's a good point. And then I just wish that I could have more playtime, or I wish that you could help me to have the opportunity to use these skills that I'm working so hard on. And then that sort of, it doesn't make any judgment of them, it just lays the problem on their lap at that point, and then you can walk away from it. None of these guarantee, obviously, that you're going to get exactly what you want with it. But do you see these as possibilities that teens could use in this type of a situation to at least walk away feeling I worked effectively with this, or I got what I wanted, or at least my point was made?
Yeah, I think that definitely helps because you're saying like, I feel hopeless rather than you're making me feel hopeless because of this. So I think that definitely helps.
Okay.
And there just has to be maturity on both sides of the conversation to be able to put each other in one's shoes and see both sides of the problem.
Good
It's probably
point.
even stickier when you're talking to family and parents, though, when you're trying to be heard.
Well, let's talk about the one, because Leah, you brought that one up.
Yeah.
Let's move into that one where a parent might be making rules without your input. I'm assuming that's what you're discussing or
Well,
talking about?
already you don't get the benefit of the doubt in anything because you're already the younger one and the parent is always watching over you. So when you start to bring something up, you just never get the benefit of the doubt in that way.
I think sometimes there's conflicting interests and that haven't been surfaced. You know, if you're thinking about a curfew, what do you think the parent's interest is in having a curfew?
Probably safety.
Safety, okay.
It's probably number one.
Yeah,
I would-
probably.
And so what is your interest in being out with your friends beyond the curfew?
Probably being social.
Being
and
accepted into your peer group and being social, not being left out.
Right.
Or just like a break from school or duties that you have at home.
To just kind of chill.
Be
and-
independent
Yeah.
and be
Could
your
also,
own
yeah, it
person.
could also be a form of trust.
Yeah.
You know, that I've reached a point where why won't you trust me in a situation?
But those are both valid interests, right?
Mhm.
Your parents do want you to be safe.
Especially
you
this
want-
day and age.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you
So-
can think of it as an and, right?
An
I
and,
mean,
yes.
We talk about that all the
That's
time.
perfect, yeah.
So it's not an either or, it's an and. It's they want you to be safe and you're developing independence, and that's what you need. So it's
if
both
you
of
can
those
continue the
things.
conversation and say, how can we come to some kind of an arrangement where you would feel that I was safe, that I was behaving safely and making good choices, and I could still participate in my social group. And
And it-
that's where you identify a compromise, the compromise that you're wanting. You're not disputing their goal and not discounting it, and you're trying to make your goal known, which they may not remember what it's like. And so your conversation starts somewhere in between instead of on these extremes of I can't, I want to, you're not allowed to, but I have to. So
I think
What
it
tends
also-
to, I'm sorry.
I was thinking also starting within the same way we talked about in the other situation, where when you are acknowledging that you understand their role, their fears, their concern with it, that can be an excellent place to sort of warm up the conversation. Because if a parent's saying, you understand me, you can see why I'm doing this, I'm not going to have to put up the defenses right away, then you can slowly lead into, and given your concerns, I want to share some of my concerns too. I feel like I need to be able to prove my honesty, my trustworthiness to you at times. And then going into what Marsha's talking about, is there a way that we can do both?
Well, and that's why, especially as being a teenager, it's so hard because when you have a curfew, it's all about like them being safe, and you want your parents to trust you that you're being safe. But that's why it's hard, because if they're giving these strict kind of things, you can think like, oh, do you think that I'm too young? But at the same time, you're in that middle where you're not young enough to like come home at that, let's just say it was like 11 o'clock. You're not young enough to like come home before then, but also you're not ready to be off on your own. So you kind of have that middle ground of when you need to be home, and that's why it's so hard, because teenagers don't like to feel like they're younger than they are. And so they don't, right, they don't like to feel that. So especially when they're, can I come home at 11:30? No, you need to be home at 10 or something. That's why it's, do you think that I'm not going to be safe enough, or do you not trust me to be out this long because I am 16 years old, or blah, 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 blah.
so
And
both
so
of you are
those are
brand new
questions.
drivers too.
Yeah, that too, right,
It's
right.
scary.
And so those are good questions, you know, and again, you want to not try and prove your point. We talked about this a little bit before, but instead of trying to prove that you can be this person and prove your point and your point of view, ask them questions, give information and get information. And getting that information from them, asking them what their concerns are, asking them what they're thinking, is a great place to start, as opposed to saying, it's very easy to get defensive and say, you know, oh, they must think,
Why
you know,
can't
why
you?
are, right, why don't you trust me, right, why don't
Well-
you, but that's not, and
And
it
it
may be
leads-
true, it may be, but that's not really the question you want to ask, right? What question do you need the answer to? That's not really the question you need the answer to.
I think it leads to negotiating too, which is something that parents usually aren't used to. They may not even accept that as a role. But when you can acknowledge, I understand, and get to the point of what do I need to do, not what do I need to do, but what do I need to do to help reassure you that I can handle this kind of a situation. And then you work for sequential steps to get to that point. It's not all at once.
Right.
But if I were to stay out maybe another 15, 20 minutes, and I get back each time at that time for the next 5 times or whatever it is, would you then be willing to give me more time? So you're negotiating your way into it, which gets away from that defensive reaction. It allows the parent to think about it, even if at first they say, well, I'm not going to do that, but give them some time to think it over. And you still can go back to that negotiating.
And even in that conversation, say those things, you know, take some time, you know, think it over, let me know, can we talk about this again, et cetera. And again, being respectful of that, their time and the conversation itself. can we talk about this now? Is this an okay time to talk about it?
And that helps limit that emotional piece too. That can help. That can start to get things off track, especially when you're starting to get more and more upset, and so things might get less and less respectful, and less and less.
All the way around, right?
Yeah.
That's not, all the way around.
Unfortunately, it may be your role to persist in having these conversations because just gradually can we talk about that again? Because in the absence of a conversation, all you have is the assumptions. This is what they might think, and they're having similar assumptions. Let me trust me. In the absence of dialogue, and there's door slamming and resentment, and you're talking on the phone with your friends and things, and that's not going to get anybody's needs met. They don't understand you. They're so unreasonable, and they're over there saying, "Oh my gosh, they're so precious, and I don't want anything to happen to them because I just read in the paper." So. Courage. You may have to persevere and gently say, "Hey, can we just talk again? Can we, continue our conversation about because it will pay off."
And not in the moment, right? Choose your time, right? You don't want to be doing this on Saturday night when you're getting ready to leave in 15 minutes, right? That's usually not the time to do it. So pick and choose times and be thoughtful about it.
If it's scary, sometimes you do wait until the last minute, but that isn't the best time.
Well, I know with like teens nowadays, like since we all text and have all the social medias, that it can be very quick planning, like meet me here in 15 minutes, and you have to go to your parent, but then spend those 15 minutes arguing with the parent, just let me go.
That's true.
And I think that it's based off safety, but also you may start to get defensive over your friends, saying, "Oh, well, Mom, why aren't you letting me hang out with them?" And you may get off track and just it doesn't get anywhere because you're not spending time proving your point or like respectfully communicating. You're kind of trying to defend your friends from your parents.
And if you switch that question around, right? "Mom, why don't you want me to hang out with them?" Switch that question around to, "Mom, do you have a concern about this person?"
Well,
do you know, it's a big, really different question.
You're mentioning too another pressure that I'm hearing, and that is even if your parents have made some ruling and you're okay with it, you may get pressure from your peers to say, "Why can't you do this?" And then you're having to defend your parents. Is that another difficult conversation that you might have to have with a peer?
Or they'll be talking about like, "Oh my God, that was so much fun," and all this stuff, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I wasn't there."
I wasn't there.
Because of my mom.
Wish that we could talk longer because I think there's some rich information here.
Very much so, yeah.
And we could prospect lots of different strategies and learn from each other intergenerationally here. But we're at the end of our episode today, but thank you so much for courageously and authentically representing your point of view.
To do this.
And we really appreciate you being here.
It'd be nice maybe to do something like this again, only have parents come in and actually work.
But
Get
not
a little
I don't know about that.
So, yes, so again, we've reached the end, and once more I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for being willing to do this and take time out and the courage to be in front of a camera and express your point of view.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So till next time, we hope that you will continue to watch the Relationship Toolbox, and please feel free to give us any feedback that you might want to share with us about this show or any other one using our email address. Goodbye.